Pork salad.
What is today's topic?
You can't laugh.
All right. Yes, it is on there. It's on Moodle. A couple things that I want to point out that I failed to mention yesterday that I just want to include with the legislative branch. Okay. If a senator or a member of the House of Representatives gets kicked out, the House and or Senate cannot elect new members.
Wait.
Right?
One more time.
And his, oh, it says Layla, you're horrible.
Oh. Whoa.
Wait, was that sad?
No, that was Layla.
Sounded like sad.
That sounded like Layla.
If you get kicked out of office, if a senator gets, if a senator dies, if a member of the House or Senate is removed from office, the Senate or the House cannot select the replacement. It must go before the people in order to do that. We talked about the elastic clause yesterday, and we did that right at the end. Just so the elastic clause is what allows the Constitution to grow without having a new amendment. So we'll talk about amendments on Tuesday. To do an amendment is difficult to do. The elastic clause allows you the freedom, for example, if you have never, when the founding fathers didn't think about TV, right, to be able to regulate that. And then we talked about how federal government or federal laws trump state laws. Just to be sure I mentioned it, that is known as federal supremacy, okay? The ability for the federal government to trump. Okay? So, with that in mind, let's talk about...
Just watch it on there.
Executive. Do I know how to spell executive? E-X-E-C. Okay, the executive branch. All right, the executive branch, their main job is to do what?
Run the country.
Enforce law.
Enforce laws. Good. Okay. This is made up of the president, the vice president, and his cabinet. All right. If you are in this role, you have a 4-year term. And there is 2 term limits, right? So you can serve twice.
Does that mean, is that like congruent to other jobs? So if I'm Speaker of the House, does that mean
Just as president. Okay. So after we have had presidents that have gone on to be the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. You can have other government jobs. Now, usually when you stop being the president, you go on speaker tours and get paid bank. Okay. You must be at least 35. So we've gone from 25 to 30 to 35, right? You must be a 14-year resident of the USA. Resident. And you must be born in the United States. So you must be a born American citizen. Only the president and the vice president have that rule. Yes, so.
Is 14 years significant, or is it just like?
It just is a thing.
Isn't one of the other ones was 7?
Right, but that is just living in there, but you don't have to be a citizen. So for example, Arnold Schwarzenegger, who was the governor of California, right? He's allowed to be the governor of California. He cannot be the president because he is not born in the United States. The only exception is if you are born in a U.S. territory or on a military base in a foreign country, because that is considered to be American territory. Okay. The president and the vice president are elected through the Electoral College. We'll talk about that more in class, but the Electoral College, the way it's set up, is that it is not a direct election, so you can win the popular vote, but still lose the presidency based on the Electoral College.
Has that ever happened?
Yes. Bush versus Gore. All right. Originally, the president and the vice president did not have to be in the same political party, which we'll see in our next unit, which creates a lot of problems.
Did the president choose the vice president?
No, the people would choose them both.
Ooh.
And so there were there were some issues, and we'll see that shortly. Okay. Put it down right there. So that'll be good on the video right there.
Right.
So.
Jared just walked in.
Okay, if the president dies, all right, there is a specific succession of the presidency. The way that it goes, all right, is you have the president, you then have the vice president, you then have
Speaker of the House.
Speaker of the House.
Speaker of the House, Vice President.
Nope. The vice president is a head of the Senate. Okay. You then have a guy called the president pro tempore. All right. He is located in the Senate. This is not the highest position in the Senate, actually, but it is number 4 in the order. You then have the Secretary of State. Following that, you have members of the cabinet, depending on how old that cabinet position is. So the original cabinet positions from the U.S. government have a higher up level. What this means is that when the president gives the State of the Union address, there is always one of these people in the succession that is not at the Capitol listening to it in case there is a terrorist attack and everybody in the government dies. You have somebody that could be serving as the president. So there's always at least one person that is not there, that is in a safe location somewhere. Yeah.
Are those guys all like prepped for like in case like they have to be president, like they know like all this stuff?
I mean, no, not really. We've never gotten past this stage, right? It's going to be really, I mean, you have to think like worst case scenario, and like really like worst case scenario to get to like here, right? But these are all career politicians. So, you know, for example, the Secretary of State is John Kerry, who ran for president. Hillary Clinton was so these are pretty big positions. They're going to do pretty, they'll be okay. All right? So, powers of the president, okay? What the president can do, okay? He has the power, page, all right, to approve or veto laws, all right? The president can make treaties with foreign countries and foreign governments. All right. He is responsible for nominating judges. Yep. And to federal courts. It's below the Supreme Court. They're national, so there are circuit courts, they're called. A federal court would be if you commit a crime, let's say, no, if you commit a crime that rises above state level. So if you kidnap somebody, okay, and you just kidnap them and you keep them in Minnesota, that's a state crime. If you kidnap them and you cross the border to Wisconsin, that becomes a federal crime. Then it would go to a federal court.
You have to have the person with you to make that a federal crime? Or is it-
Yes, it would be that just in that example. Federal courts are considered more. You guys are really being annoying. Well, you are, and I'm going to kick you out very shortly. So stop being annoying. Okay. Federal courts are much more serious in general than state cases, and if you end up going to federal prison, that is considerably worse than a state prison. It's much more severe. So if you, for example, Bernie Madoff, who ran the big Ponzi scheme in New York, right? He went to federal prison, which is much worse than, say, Denny Hecker, who got in trouble here, who went to state prisons, but got moved around. So you want to avoid federal prison if you can. And again, federal will trump state, right? He appoints cabinet members. So he gets to choose who is in his cabinet, who's working with him, and he is commander-in-chief of, you guys know what that says, of the U.S. Armed Forces. Okay? So he's in charge of the military. Does not mean that he is leading the charge into battle, but he is the one responsible for it. Okay? All of these are checked. All of these powers are checked. All right? Nominations must be approved by the Senate. Treaties must be approved by the Senate. The approving and veto of laws can be overridden by the Congress with the 2/3 vote. Okay? So he is checked on all spots. You also have the traditional duty to provide the State of the Union address. In the Constitution, it does not say that the president must do this every year, but George Washington started doing this, and it became tradition. Okay? The president can be impeached. We have talked about this. As a reminder, if you are impeached, what does that mean? You have been tried of a crime, right? After you are impeached, then what happens?
You were either taken out of office.
Then you are tried, right? Who impeaches the president?
Supreme Court.
No,
House of
the House. Who tries the impeachment? The Senate. Okay? The House impeaches, the Senate tries it. Okay? You can be impeached for very few things. Okay? What it says you can be impeached for in the Constitution is for treason. Treason means what? Good. You can be impeached for bribery. And then also high crimes and misdemeanors. So, when we talk about Clinton, did he commit treason? No. Did he bribe anyone? No. Did he commit any high crimes or misdemeanors? No. It is because of this that he was not found guilty of his impeachment. All right? The idea is you cannot impeach a president for different political views. So whenever you hear people saying, we should impeach Bush, there's a lot of that. Or we should impeach Obama, right? There are no political grounds to impeach the president in either of those situations just because you don't like them. Okay?
to do something really bad.
You got to do something bad. And we've never had a president be convicted of impeachment. Nixon would have likely been convicted of impeachment had he not resigned. Okay? That's the executive branch. Pretty simple. Any questions about it? Okay, so we're going to do the judicial branch then. The judicial branch, okay, made up of the Supreme Court and the federal courts. Their job is to do what with laws?
Decided for constitutional.
Okay, good. They interpret laws, okay? So, you have, when you are talking about this, they will take federal courts. The way it will work is that if you want to get a case to the Supreme Court, you go from a state court, it is appealed to a federal court, it is appealed to the Supreme Court. At any level above, the court does not have to accept your appeal. So the Supreme Court, if you are appealing to the Supreme Court, they do not have to take your case. They can just say, we don't think it's worthwhile, and they won't do so. So what we see is that when you see cases that have made it to the Supreme Court, Oftentimes they are cases selected by lawyers knowing that they're worth getting there. So when we see gay marriage cases, for example, you try to find a case that will be very cut and dry from your perspective. You don't want to send something up that's going to be iffy, because if you lose, it's done, right? So what we see here, all right, when we have this, the Supreme Court, if you are in the Supreme Court, the justices serve for life. Why is it a good idea to have a Supreme Court justice serve for life?
Because it's very hard to have the knowledge of the Supreme Court justice.
No.
You don't have to have a lot of them.
No.
Well, it's consistent that way.
No.
It takes long.
What do congressmen have to worry about every 2 years?
Re-election.
Re-election. And in order to get re-elected, what do you have to do?
Make popular decisions.
Make popular decisions. If you are serving for life, you are comfortable knowing that you can make any decision you want and not have to worry about your decision costing your job. So what we see is that there are often times where a president will pick somebody to be on the Supreme Court that they think will be ideologically along their lines, and then all of a sudden they switch. So you might have somebody who the president thought was going to be a very conservative justice, and all of a sudden they become very liberal, right? And they are safe from that, okay? So that's why you have people serving for life. The interesting thing about it now is that you have justices that are living much longer than they used to. So potentially, if you look at someone like, the people who have been put on recently, John Roberts, Sam Alito, Sonia Sotomayor, they're all in their like late 40s, early 50s. They, in theory, could be justices for 40 years. And there's an interesting question of is it a good idea to have somebody in power for that long? Yeah,
Can you resign?
you can resign. But if you're resigning for a pretty good gig, right?
But what if it's like, well, yeah,
So yes, people do resign. But what you often then see is that people will resign when it'll be interesting to see if we have anyone resign next year or in the next 2 years that are liberal to give Obama the chance to nominate another liberal justice, right? But at the same time, this is considered a pretty conservative court. 5-4 usually is how it goes. But in the next year or two, really this session, they could, if they legalize gay marriage, they will become one of the most liberal courts for doing that. It'll be right up with the court in the 60s known as the Warren Court that legalized everything for civil rights. So it's interesting how it can work out. Their most important job is to declare laws unconstitutional or constitutional, either or, right? When they decide something, that becomes it. So abortion is legal in the United States because of Roe versus Wade. States have attempted to cut into those laws, but they cannot outright ban abortion because of the federal law, all right? And the big example of that right now is Texas, where Texas has been closing abortion clinics by saying you have to have emergency services, like an emergency room to have an abortion there, which they think they can do, and that's something that the Supreme Court is looking at. And they've recently reopened it, but that's something that will keep going. They will settle disputes amongst states. And the Chief Justice, who right now is John Roberts, he presides over the impeachment trials. To be the Chief Justice, the reason why Roberts was picked is because the previous Chief Justice stepped down, and so they were replacing him. It is not you don't have to be the most senior member of the court to be the Chief Justice. It's kind of one of those just right place, right time things. Okay? The only law in the Constitution, all right? The only crime that can be committed according to the Constitution is treason. That is the only thing in the Constitution that is listed as a crime. It also points out that within this, if you commit treason, only the person committing treason can be punished. It cannot follow to their kids or to their parents in that way. Okay? Relation of states. Within the Constitution, it says that certain laws need to be followed among states, but states do have the ability to create their own laws. So, we do not have sales tax on clothes in Minnesota. All right? That is our right where other states do. There are states where you can drive 75 miles an hour. There are states you can drive 65 miles an hour, right? The states have the ability to make those choices themselves. There are states that you can get married if you are gay, and there are states you cannot get married if you are gay, right? Anything that the Supreme Court does not provide, or that the federal government does not give, the states can pick those things, all right? If you commit a crime and you go to another state and are caught, the state you commit the crime in is allowed to extradite you, bring you back to their state. Another state cannot harbor you, cannot hold you. So if you killed Tyler, okay, and then ran to Wisconsin, and in Wisconsin they found you, okay, the state of Wisconsin could not say we're not giving him back, right? They had to give you back. Edward Snowden, the NSA guy, who's in Russia right now, he can stay there because Russia's keeping them or allowing him to stay. That would not work state to state here. Okay? All right, last thing we will do is we'll wait for that for the next one. So are there any questions for this? Yeah.
Treason, that has to do with the actual justices.
For anyone. It's the only crime that's mentioned directly in the Constitution. Okay, so it says nothing in the Constitution about murder. It says nothing about theft. The only crime is treason. Okay? On Tuesday, what we will do is we will do the amendment process, and then we will look at the Bill of Rights and the amendments. Okay? Which is how you officially change the Constitution. Any questions? Gentlemen, any other dumb jokes you want to get on here before we stop the recording?
Good.
Last chance.
I wouldn't say they're dumb.